Я думаю, ребят, можно начинать, да, потихоньку, потому что время уже, значит, сейчас я приму всех, кто хочет подключиться, уже 38-39 человек. Так, сегодня у нас, значит, направление права. Сегодня перед вами выступят два наших замечательных спикера. В данный момент мы прослушаем презентацию спикера из Испании, Себастьяна Контина. Через 1,5 часа к нам подключится спикер из Соединенных Штатов Америки Дэниел Барр. Оба спикера являются ведущими специалистами в своих странах по медиаправу. Вот сейчас я приму желающих и расскажу, значит, кто наши спикеры. Себастьян Контин специализируется на европейском праве, законодательстве о конкуренции и медиаправе. С 2007 по 2019 год он был советником Народной партии в городском совете Сарагосы, работал в департаменте частного права Совета Европы в Страсбурге, а также в отделе судебных споров в Мадриде. То есть это специалист, практик, который решает вопросы не только журналистов, а решает общие вопросы прав человека. Поэтому давайте прослушаем его выступление. Вот. Выступление будет на английском языке. Будет также перевод до тех моментов, может быть, общий перевод смысла, который вам понадобится для понимания речи спикера. Let's just introduce our speaker today is my good friend, is a leader, Asian global leader from Spain, Sebastьян Контин, the big specialist in international law. And please, Sebastьян, let's start and tell us about yourself, first of all.
Well, thank you very much, Madina, for your invitation. It's a pleasure to join you, especially to you, my colleague, my friend, Madina Shirova, also to Alibek, who is helping, and to Madina Userva, who is going to make some of the translations in case someone needs. Congratulations for the organization of this webinar. It is very interesting. It's always a challenge to see how ONGs like yours try to improve the human rights conditions and also in this case, the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, and to encourage people to understand the importance of it. So this is, as I say, an honor for me to join you. It's very interesting because it's my first visit to Kazakhstan, even if it's virtual, but I hope to be there at least once in the future. I hope to visit your country very soon. I know about your country through Madina comments. She's always explaining us how it is, and I have seen videos, many pictures. I really would like to go one day. And as Madina was saying, I have some academic and professional experience regarding the protection of human rights. And I would like to talk to you about it today. So I'm going to make a presentation. I'm going to prepare it, right now. Yes, so my name is Sebastьян, and as Madina was saying, I'm an international lawyer, but in fact, I was working as a lawyer until 2007 when I moved to the public sector. I have been working until today as a politician, so I have seen both sides, the private and the public, and now I'm a member of one of the regional parliaments in Spain. I was studying specializing in international law in different fields, and I began my career in the field of law, working in the legal services of a bank, later in the Council of Europe. I think this is the more interesting for you because it's an international organization devoted to the protection of human rights and democracy. I was collaborating there on projects in 2 departments. It was very interesting for promoting democracy around the world. So what I want to talk to you about today is mainly about human rights. I think it's a passionate topic. It's very interesting. I don't know if you are aware that on 10th December every year we celebrate the Human Rights Day. So I wanted to talk to you first. Let me introduce you what human rights are. And human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity. I know that you have different ethnias in Kazakhstan, or religions, language, any other status. So human rights include the right to life, liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion, which is the one who is affecting most of you because you are a group of media representatives and also students. And of course, the right to education and to work and many more. And this is the definition given by the United Nations, okay? And the United Nations protect human rights through the international human rights law, as you can read in the second line. The international human rights laws lay down the obligation of every government in the world to act from certain acts. So they have to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of individuals or groups. And this is a great achievement. We have a human rights law that protect everyone around the world. It's universal, it's international, protected, thanks to these United Nations different bodies. And we have different accepted rights, including civil, cultural, economic, political, social rights. There are also mechanisms to promote and protect these rights, to assist states as Kazakhstan in carrying out their responsibilities. And this, the base is, you have it in bold letters there, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of the UN and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This Universal Declaration was adopted in 1948. 1948. So in 28 years, it will be 100 years old. And since that time, United Nations has expanded human rights so much to specific standards. As I have seen that there were several women attending this seminar. So, for example, there are specific standards for women, for children, for people with disabilities, for minorities or ethnias or any other vulnerable groups. And now everyone, any of you possess the right for asking for protection of these rights because are human rights, and discrimination is not permitted. So there are several bodies, also there are courts, there are tribunals which protect you. What do this Universal Declaration of Human Rights mean? Is a milestone document in the history of human rights. It's the first, the most important one, was drafted by representatives with different legal backgrounds from all regions around the world. And then it was finally proclaimed, as I was saying, in 1948. What do they say? That the human rights have to be universally protected. So I'm not talking about as a Spanish person or as a European person. Any of you can ask these rights to be protected, okay? Actually, for understanding the importance of it, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been translated into more than 500 languages. So much more than nations are in the world. There are like 192 nations, states in the world now. So 500 languages. And it's the most translated document in the world because it's very important and it's also inspiring a lot of constitutions of many different states. Any new state that is building a new constitution is using this Universal Declaration for it. And also, after this Universal Declaration, along the years, we were having more and more different rights. For example, you have to take into consideration that there are also economic, social, cultural rights. So we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights together with other bodies that protect economic, social, cultural, also civil, political rights. For example, a civil right or a political right is to be protected against death penalty. This is something that the United Nations have been working on so much, and many countries have been avoiding death penalty in a way that no one should do it around the world. But there are still some paths to follow, but it's going very well in this sense. And regarding the economic, social, and cultural rights, I think this is very important for you there in Kazakhstan. The covenant came into force in 1976, and the human rights included are a bit different from the Universal Declaration. It's talking about the right to work in just and favorable conditions, the right to social protection, to an adequate standard of living. For example, people with poor means are protected also by these laws. It's true that are basic principles and are very difficult to reach also, but are very important. And we have to think big. We have to believe that it's possible always to grow in the human rights progress. Also, the right to education and the enjoyment of benefits of cultural freedom. And regarding the civil and political rights, there is also a covenant for it, and the rights are maybe more close to you because as journalists, we talk about freedom of movement, equality before the law, the right to a fair trial, the presumption of innocence, the freedom of thoughts, the freedom of conscience and religion, also the freedom of opinion and expression. This is the key for you. You have the right for giving your opinion, for expressing yourselves, for delivering the news you are learning around in a fair way. The right to peaceful assembly, freedom of association, participation in public affairs, and something that is also important there in your country, the protection of minority rights, okay? So the deprivation of life is prohibited. The torture is forbidden. Cruelty or degrading treatment in prisons or punishment is forbidden. Slavery, of course, and forced labor is forbidden. You can't arrest or detain someone arbitrarily. You can't interfere with privacy of people. You can use war propaganda, discrimination. So all these bodies protect human rights, and for it, there is United Nations has a Human Rights Council. You can read in the last sentence that is written in the presentation, the Human Rights Council that is working since 2006 and was created by the General Assembly of the United Nations, is reporting directly to it. And this council is made up of 47 state representatives. Okay, so they have to promote and strengthen the protection of human rights around the globe and have to take care of human rights violations and make recommendations. And there is also the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. This is the last part of the last sentence that you can find in the presentation. And this UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has his main task is exercise the principal responsibility for UN human rights activities. And he is mandated to respond to serious violations of human rights and to undertake preventive action. So this is what United Nations is offering to us. It's a very good system. We can say that human rights is cross-cutting in all UN policies and programs, in all the key areas, in peace and security, in development, in humanitarian assistance, in economic and social affairs. So this is what is going on around the world, okay? It's affecting everyone. All of us have human rights. All of us can claim for our human rights. But I have been invited by Madina Shilova for giving you a vision from Europe. Europe is considered a paradise in protection of human rights. And we have an organ, apart from the United Nations organ, we have our own organ, is the Council of Europe. And this is what we have in Europe. We have the Council of Europe that is different. This is very important. It's different from the European Union institutions, okay? The Council of Europe is, there are 47 member states. And in the European Union, there are far less states. There are 27 states now. So the Council of Europe with 47 member states, some of the states are going to impress you because are very close to Kazakhstan. Actually, are not exactly in Europe. We will talk about this in some minutes. So 830 million Europeans are protected not only by the United Nations regulations, but also by the Council of Europe regulations. And what you have to do is you are a member state and you have to sign the European Convention of Human Rights, a treaty that tries to protect human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. That's why the motto, you can see the last sentence, upholding human rights, democracy, and the rule of law is the motto of the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe has abolished the death penalty in Europe, in these 47 countries. Is fighting for freedom of expression, is now working lately in the last 10 years, safeguarding children's rights, promoting gender equality. This is very important for you, for the women there in Kazakhstan, and is combating terrorism, is guaranteeing compliance with quality standards for medicines, healthcare, very important things for today. And these issues affect each and every one of us. And how do we do it? With more than 220 regulations. Yeah, it's a lot, but the Council of Europe tries to uphold the fundamental values of our continent: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The best known of its treaties, as I say, is the European Convention on Human Rights. And we have also a court, the European Court of Human Rights, that are regularly reported on in the media. So this is the motto: upholding human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And here you can see the 47 member states. You can see the different flags of the different countries. You can see here how all the European countries. I'm pointing now with the cursor that you see from here: Spain, Portugal, France, the UK, Germany, Poland, but also Ukraine, Romania, Turkey, also the Russian Federation, places that are very close to you here, Kazakhstan. So you are surrounded by countries. Yes?
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Can you close your presentation and then close your presentation and then try to just show us it again, because we have some problems.
No problem.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was watching something going on over the presentation, like someone painting.
Yes, somebody paints on your presentation, and it's really just we can't how to know how to.
No problem.
Take it over. Thank you.
It's okay.
We are waiting for presentation. Just.
Okay, sorry. I go right now. We are back here. Okay, so.
Oh, thank you. Now it's much better than previous. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. So here you have the 47 member states. Okay. Also, you can see that is in both languages of the Council of Europe, because there is in English, of course, but it's also Alibek will understand. It's also in French language, and the both languages that are official in the Council of Europe. So 47 member states, 800 million Europeans, and there are 47 states in confront to 27 member states in the European Union. There are much more here. For example, you have countries that you can see there, that you have here the South Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, or Azerbaijan. There is Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Balkans. There is also the Russian Federation and Turkey, Ukraine. So you are surrounded by countries belonging to the Council of Europe, which was one of the first international institutions to open its doors to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall, okay? And it was helping these countries to carry out the necessary political, legislative, constitutional, and judicial reforms, and also has succeeded adapting modern-day challenges with new treaties in areas such as cybercrime, data protection, international terrorism, human trafficking, violence against women, the sexual abuse of children. And I was precisely the time I was spending in the Council of Europe, I was working in democracy developments in this country, this small country in the South Caucasus, in Georgia, and was a very challenging and very good job that I have great memories about. And for giving you an idea, there are in this map countries as the Holy See, or countries that are far away as Canada, Japan, the US, or Mexico, that are observers, have observer status with the Council of Europe. They don't have territories in Europe, but they are observers. And you have also to know that this was first. This was before the European Union, some years before. Actually, no country has joined the European Union without first being a member of the Council of Europe. I'm sorry because the names are a bit confusing. Honestly, many Europeans don't distinguish between these organs because the names are very similar. But it's different from the European Union organs that deal with other different topics than the human rights. So, what is the role of this Council of Europe? Let's say that the Council of Europe pioneered the European integration process, was helping. It was established in 1949, just after the Second World War, and wanted to ensure the political reconstruction of Europe based on a set of fundamental values, and because we were having a lot of problems in Europe after the Second World War. And that's why now, started very slowly, but now we are, as I was saying, 47 member states for strengthening human rights, democracy, and the rule of law throughout the continent and also beyond. It's based in Strasbourg. This is a very beautiful city in France. There are 2,000 people working there, 2,000 people workers from the 47 member states, and has also external offices, some small external offices. As I was saying to you, it has successfully developed a rights protection system. The best known is the European Court of Human Rights, where every European, every citizen of these 47 member states can challenge his own country, his own state, okay? So you, for example, imagine Kazakhstan belongs to the Council of Europe and you have a problem in Kazakhstan with the government, you can go before this European Court of Human Rights for challenging your rights. And also, the court also oversees the implementation of the convention in the 47 member states and many other different things. And as I was saying before, one of the most important ones is the abolition, the total abolition of the death penalty. Okay, it's one of the greatest achievements of the Council of Europe. And there is no capital punishment used in any of these 47 countries, 47 member states since 1997. So in these 47 countries, no one has been killed by the prisons, by the penalty system, by the criminal law in more than 23 years. And this is one of the greatest achievements of the Council of Europe. How? The European Convention of Human Rights. This was the most important document. This is the document all of us are always looking at, and came into force that same year, was signed, 1950, and secures fundamental civil and political rights. As I was saying, I insist, because very important, is the right to life, the right to a fair trial, the freedom of expression, the freedom of thought and religion. Also, torture, forced labor, capital punishment, all forms of discrimination are prohibited. And there is a unique system for ensuring respect for human rights, the European Court of Human Rights. So, the Council of Europe, as I say there in the first sentence, is active in all areas affecting European society, with the exception of defense and the economy. Defense and the economy also in the European Union are treated not very strongly. Economy is important, but for example, there are no fiscal agreements, but this is other thing. And what the Council of Europe tries to do is addresses modern day challenges such as, and I let you read for some seconds all the things you can read there as intercultural dialogue, education for citizenship, against money laundering, hate speech, fighting terrorism, protection of journalists. This is very important. And we say in Europe that, I don't know if you say something similar in Kazakhstan, but maybe you do, that we have, the states have 3 powers the executive, the government, the legislative, the parliament, and also the judiciary, okay, the courts, the tribunals. And we say that the journalists, the media are the fourth power because they also protect the system. So,
Sebastian,
yes.
Can I interrupt you again?
Of course.
Some of us participants ask for translate. Can we ask Madina Maulena, please, can you translate this part of speech? Okay, let's continue, and then I think Madina Maulena will translate everything in one speech here. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Madina. Both Madinas, thanks a lot. So I think you have had time for reading about all these addresses that the Council of Europe is taking into consideration and how do the Council of Europe work, these institutions and bodies, okay? There are a number of separate bodies and individuals are responsible for the functioning of the Council of Europe. And each of them, one is playing a vital role. So I go right away to it. The first one I wanted to talk about is the most important one is the Committee of Ministers, the decision-making body. All the states sit here, okay? This is the Council of Europe's decision-making body and comprises the foreign ministers of all the member states under permanent diplomatic representatives in Strasbourg. There are a lot of diplomats in Strasbourg for attending these meetings. And this Committee of Ministers decides the Council of Europe's policy and approve its budget and program of activities. I was underlining here that supervises the execution of the judgments delivered by the European Court of Human Rights, because that's one of the important topics that the Committee of Ministers is dealing with, decision-making body. The Parliamentary Assembly, this is the represents all the national parliaments. So, for example, a representative of the German or the French or the in Azerbaijan parliament, all of them are represented here. Okay, the same members of the national parliaments, some of them are here in this Parliamentary Assembly, and it's a forum for debates and proposals concerning the big European social and political affairs. I have been attending many debates there and are very, very interesting. And it has been responsible for many of the conventions, including, of course, the European Convention of Human Rights. And I was underlining here that elects the judges to the European Court of Human Rights, the Commissioner for Human Rights, and the Secretary General. So he's taking a big role in human rights also. The Congress, the voice of local and regional democracy. Maybe this is too specific, so we can skip it. We're going to the European Court of Human Rights. Okay, this is the judiciary body. It was established in 1959, very soon after the Council of Europe started to work. And this is an institution that allows individuals, as I was saying, groups, also governments, regardless of nationality, to contest alleged breaches of the European Convention of Human Rights. Okay, supervises the implementation of the European Convention of Human Rights. Anyone can go there. Okay, I think this is what makes the difference, because it's I find it extraordinary that all the states have decided that there is a higher body, a higher judiciary body as this one, for even for letting the individuals investigate the same member states. It's very important. It's ruling many important. It's taking many important decisions every year, and it's also helped with the Commissioner for Human Rights. This is an independent institution within the Council of Europe. She is mandated. In this case, it's a lady, as you can see. Is from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Usually are elected for 6 years, and you can't repeat the mandate, so you don't have these kind of temptations that usually interfere in political decisions, and tries to promote awareness and respect for human rights in all the 47 Council of Europe member states. The Conference of International Non-Governmental Organizations, probably very interesting for for Almaty, for Madina's NGOs, because this conference provides a vital link between politicians and the citizens, helps to ensure that the voice of civil society is heard at the Council of Europe. And so there are more than 300 belonging to it, and a lot of delegates from these NGOs. They meet a couple of times per year and also have a very important role there. The Secretary General is elected by the Parliamentary Assembly for a period of 5 years, is the head of the organization. So let's say that she's now, this Croatian lady is the boss of all of us, and is responsible for the strategic planning, for management of the program of activities and the budget of the Council of Europe. Okay, her name, I don't know if I'm going to read it well, is Maria Pejinovic-Buric, and she's from Croatia, 5 years. And also she's elected, I think I have said it, by the Parliamentary Assembly in a separate ballot. Okay, major achievements. As I was saying, there are more than, here there's a mistake, because there are more than 220 treaties, including on the following topics. These are the things that the Council of Europe is ruling around and is influencing also the laws all around the world, because there are many countries that copy what the Council of Europe is doing. So here you have the main conventions. The Council of Europe upholds human rights and democracy through these international conventions. These are agreements which are legally binding upon member states once they have signed and ratified them. And the state's policies are regularly reviewed to ensure that they are in compliance with the conventions. These are the topics I was writing to you for making you know how it works. For example, the abolition of death penalty. There was a treaty for it. The prevention of torture. There is also social protection through the European Social Charter. We have a specific document for protecting social rights from 1961. It had a revision in 1996 and safeguards the economic and social rights of Europe's citizens: employment, social and legal protection, housing, health, education, free movement, non-discrimination. The next, protection of national minorities or fighting cybercrime. We have a convention on cybercrime that came into force in 2004. So 16 years old now, and serves as a guide for any country wishing to develop coherent and comprehensive legislation on cybercrime. You know that cybercrime is innovating every day. It's very complicated to follow, because for creating a law, it takes always a lot of time. But for the criminals, it's so quick to understand new ways for committing crimes through the internet. So this is the only legally binding international instrument in this field. There is nothing similar in the world. Human trafficking or sexual exploitation of children. This is very dramatic. So this is also the first instrument to criminalize the various types of sexual abuse of children, including abuse committed at home or in their own family. There is a special committee responsible for monitoring whether parties effectively implement the convention. The next one is violence against women and domestic violence. This, unluckily, is something that is still going on in many places around the world. So we have a special convention calling on signatory states to take steps to prevent all forms of violence, to protect the victims, to prosecute perpetrators. And it's a significant step forwards in this field, based on the premise that such violence cannot be eradicated unless all of us make efforts. And all the states are making efforts to achieve greater equality between women and men. And the last one, Medicrime. This has a strange name, but means that it's the Convention to Safeguard Public Health. Okay, it's the Medicrime. Thanks to this Medicrime Convention, by the way, is open to non-European states. Some of these conventions are open to non-European states. And for example, I will tell you afterwards, Kazakhstan has joined one of these conventions. Okay, So thanks to this convention, it now is possible to punish as criminal offenses on the grounds of damage to public health, the manufacturing, distribution and sale, including via the internet, of counterfeit medical products. This is very important now with the coronavirus crisis, where, as you will remember, many countries were trying to get suppliers that at the beginning of the crisis didn't arrive to the countries or did not have the quality that was precise for it. So it's something that is very, very useful now. Well, I didn't write it down, but an additional protocol to the European Convention is the prevention of terrorism. I don't know if in Kazakhstan you have terrorist problems. You will let me know afterwards in the Q&A. But this convention was adopted in 2015 to address the problem of the foreign terrorist fighters, what is called foreign terrorist fighters. And one last one I wanted to mention that I didn't write it down, but there is an anti-doping convention that has been working for many years, since 1989. And it's the only international legal instrument in this area. So when there are, for example, Olympic Games or any big sports events, this is the regulation that is taking place, is dealing with it, the anti-doping convention. So also about, there are regulations about biomedicine for safeguarding ethical practice as protecting the human embryo and the fetus, or how to use the medical records. Well, we can talk about this for long because there are more than 220 treaties. That is maybe can look like excessive regulation, but it's the only way for controlling certain problems. And I was mentioning at the beginning this, that is very important, but I have to say that many Europeans don't distinguish between the Council of Europe and the European Union, that are totally different bodies, are two separate organizations, as you can read in the presentation, but are separate organizations, but have complementary roles, okay? So they are different. The European Union shares the core values on which the Council of Europe is based. Actually, as a curiosity, a wide range of joint programs with the European Union is helping to support legal and institutional reform, for example, throughout not only Europe, but also in North Africa. And the two organizations, well, are international organizations, both. From the legal point of view, they work together closely in areas of mutual interest, such as promoting human rights and democracy in Europe, in neighboring regions, and some major programs and substantial financial resources have been deployed with a view to achieve the organization's common goal of peace. There is an important treaty in the European Union, is the Lisbon Treaty, and this treaty was signing the European Convention of Human Rights of the Council of Europe. So this was the way for creating a common European legal space for these over 830 million citizens. And as well as the European Union, the Council of Europe has close ties with the United Nations and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, okay? This is kind of anecdotic, but I think that is something funny to talk about, European symbols. We have a flag. Europe has a flag. I don't know if you knew about it. We have a flag, an anthem, and a logo, okay? So the European flag has 12 gold stars against a blue background, and is very famous around the world. It was created by the Council of Europe in 1955, and was also adopted by the European Union in 1985. This is very nice, but it's impossible to distinguish institutions if you are copying the symbols, but it's very nice that are united in these common symbols for the European construction, because it means that we are members of other common goals that are over us. And also we have a European anthem, which is, maybe some of you know it, the Ode to Joy, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, that from 1972 is used by the Council of Europe, and is also used by the European Union from, I think it's 1986, maybe I was committing a mistake there. Okay, 1980 something. So in the Council of Europe's logo, we have the European flag combined with a dynamic symbol. Is this one? Sorry, here we have it small. Okay, is this one here? The spiral, representing the shared experiences of European countries and the unwavering commitment of the Council of Europe to defend its values. So, if you would like to have more information, because I'm talking too much, I think, about it. Maybe you want to know much more, but I didn't know if you already know about it or not. So I give you here, and I am at your disposal, of course, in case you want to have to write me an email to ask for anything. You have free resources in this website, edoc.coe.int. There is also a bookshop, and there are also multimedia. Okay, I wanted to put some of the videos, but was becoming a very long presentation, so you can check there how the explanations of how the Council of Europe and its organ works, very, very, very well explained and in a very simple way. These are the buildings. The main ones are this one, Palais de l'Europe, is the Palace of Europe. This is where most of the organs are, the ones we were talking about, and this has a separate, the Human Rights Building has a separate part, sorry, a separate part that is just in front of the one of each other. So, are very close to each other. That's something that is very important because Madina Shulova told me, there are students coming. Okay, I wanted to talk to you about the European Youth Centers. There are two, sorry, in Strasbourg and Budapest. So young people are very important for Europe because they are our future and they have to learn about democracy, human rights, and rule of law. So young people play a key role in developing European societies. And in order to work with young people as effectively as possible, the Council of Europe has adopted an original approach through its co-management system, which gives youth organizations an equal say in deciding on youth policies, programs, priorities. So over 5,000 young people from all backgrounds attend study sessions, seminars, courses each year at the European Youth Centers. I think that any country can ask for it. I mean, that also Kazakhs can try to join one of these programs because what the Council of Europe tried to do is to widespread the human rights. So everyone is welcome. You can try, you can check the website, and you can have opportunities for working with probably all the expenses paid. You can have the chance for working to work in Strasbourg and Budapest for some days for learning, because more than 15,000 young people have benefited from projects supported by this European Youth Foundation with a view to promoting understanding, tolerance, solidarity, as I write here, to also gathering people, young people coming from conflict-stricken regions. And for example, you may know about the No Hate Speech movement. This was launched, was an idea that was being worked in one of these forums. And this is very boring, but we have to talk about because how everything is paid, how all this party is paid. Okay, the Council of Europe's budget is very important. For 2020 is almost 500 million of euro. The budget is mainly funded by member states' contributions. The national contributions are based on a formula which takes into account population and gross domestic product. That's why the major contributors are, as you can see here, are France, Germany, Italy, or the Russian Federation and the United Kingdom. Then comes my country, Spain. All pay the same rate for the ordinary budget, but you pay according to these two factors, population and gross domestic product, okay? You have here also some countries who want to compromise a little bit more, or the ones that are small and give less than 1%. Opportunities for Kazakhstan. Okay, we are arriving to the end, and you are going to have the chance for asking questions, but I wanted to advance this because I think that is important. Kazakhstan tried to join the Council of Europe, applied for the special guest status. This is the first step with the Parliamentary Assembly, that place where I was saying to you that many members of the parliaments of different countries are joining. So Kazakhstan applied to join this body in 1999, okay? But the Assembly found that Kazakhstan could apply for full membership. So Kazakhstan has the right for joining the Council of Europe, because the Council of Europe was saying, I don't know if you are going to agree with this, or if in the geography lessons you are learning this, but the Council of Europe said that Kazakhstan, 4% of its territory belongs to Europe, okay? The west of the Ural River is located in Europe, and this was the way for granting a special guest status, but the Council of Europe said, okay, we can't give it if there are no improvements in the fields of democracy and human rights. And I don't know how this issue is now, if Kazakhstan was fulfilling these requirements, but in fact, Kazakhstan is what I wrote also there, signed a cooperation agreement, okay, with the Assembly in April 2004, and in November 2006, the Kazakhstan parliament officially asked to be granted observer status with the Assembly, which, however, never was granted due to this requiring of pre-compliance with all Council of Europe core values and principles, okay? So, I was saying to you before, there are some conventions, some of the rulings, some of the laws, for example, about sexual abuse or corruption or terrorism, that other countries from outside the Council of Europe can join. So Kazakhstan acceded to the Council of Europe European Cultural Convention in 2010. And also, I was told when I was talking to colleagues that I was going to talk to you about the Council of Europe, that in March 2010, so 10 years ago, the president of the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly made an official visit to Kazakhstan, okay, for getting closer to the Council of Europe and Kazakhstan, and was resulting in a conclusion that the Council of Europe and Kazakhstan should strengthen their relations. And also, this was a milestone that was emboldened Kazakhstan's Path to Europe program. I think you know, probably you know about it. It's called a Path to Europe program in Kazakhstan, as outlined by Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev in Astana in 2008. And in December, afterwards, in December 2013, a joint declaration on enhancing cooperation between Kazakhstan and the Council of Europe in 2014-2015 was signed with the purpose of paving the way for Kazakhstan's accession to the Council of Europe's multiple conventions in the field of criminal justice. So these are, I wouldn't say the possibilities, I prefer to say opportunities, because it would be great for Kazakhstan to join, because it would mean that you are joining this great international organization. And here you have what other countries do, other possibilities. You can check there are observer states. This was I was mentioning. Also, neighborhood partners as Morocco and Tunisia in the north of Africa. Parliamentary Assembly, there are observer status. So Canada, Israel, and Mexico are sending their members of the parliament for attending the sessions. And there are also external offices that are trying to, I was realizing that there is no an external office in your country, but in many other countries, some of them are in the Council of Europe, some others are not, and also liaison offices. So these are the possibilities that you have, and you through NGOs, you have the possibility of pushing these agendas. You have to insist to the politicians of your country, please, let's join the Council of Europe, because this means that we are going to protect our rights better. Okay, so I encourage you to do so if you believe in it. And this is the presentation. And if you have, thank you very much for attending. And if you have any comment or question, I'm at your disposal for now.
Thank you, Sebastian, for your great presentation. Let's, Madina Maulin, if you are here, please translate.
Окей. Давайте я вкратце расскажу, о чем шла презентация. Значит, презентация началась с дефиниции, что такое права человека. Итак, права человека – это права, присущие всем людям, независимо от расы, пола, национальности, этнической принадлежности, языка, религии или любого другого статуса. Права человека включают право на жизнь и свободу, свободу от рабства и пыток, свободу мнений и их выражения, право на работу и образование и многое другое. Все имеют право на эти права без какой-либо дискриминации. Значит, Всеобщая декларация прав человека – очень важный документ в истории прав человека, составлена представителями с разным правовым и культурным прошлым из всех регионов мира. Декларация была провозглашена Генеральной Ассамблеей Организации Объединенных Наций в Париже 10 декабря 1948 года резолюцией 217А Генеральной Ассамблеи в качестве общего стандарта достижений для всех народов. В нем впервые изложены основные права человека, подлежащие всеобщей защите. С момента принятия в 1948 году Всеобщая декларация прав человека была переведена более чем на 500 языков. Это самый переводимый документ в мире и послужила источником вдохновения для конституций многих независимых государств и многих новых демократий. Всеобщая декларация прав человека вместе с Международным пактом о гражданских и политических правах и двумя дополнительными протоколами к нему и Международным пактом об экономических, социальных и культурных правах и дополнительным протоколом к нему образуют так называемый Международный биль о правах человека. Международный пакт об экономических, социальных и культурных правах вступил в силу в 1976 году. Пакт касается таких прав, как свобода передвижения, равенство перед законом, право на справедливое судебное разбирательство и презумпцию невиновности, свобода мысли, совести и религии, свобода мнения и выражения. Так, Совет по правам человека, учрежденный 15 марта 2006 года Генеральной Ассамблеей и подотчетный непосредственно ей, заменил 60-летнюю комиссию ООН по правам человека в качестве ключевого межправительственного органа ООН, ответственного за права человека. Совет состоит из 47 представителей государства, и ему поручено укреплять поощрение и защиту прав человека во всем мире путем рассмотрения ситуации нарушений прав человека и вынесения рекомендаций по ним. Самым новаторским элементом Совета по правам человека является универсальный периодический обзор. Значит, Верховный комиссар ООН по правам человека несет основную ответственность за деятельность ООН в области прав человека. Верховный комиссар уполномочен реагировать на серьезные нарушения прав человека и принимать превентативные меры. Права человека и система ООН. Права человека являются сквозной темой во всех стратегиях и программах ООН в ключевых областях мира безопасности, развития, гуманитарной помощи и экономических и социальных вопросов. В результате практически все органы и специализированные учреждения ООН в той или иной степени участвуют в защите прав человека. Так, Совет Европы – ведущая правозащитная организация на континенте. В его состав входят 47 государств-членов, в том числе все члены Европейского Союза. Все государства-члены Совета Европы подписали Европейскую конвенцию о правах человека, договор, направленный на защиту прав человека, демократии и верховенства закона. Разрабатывая, внедряя и отслеживая более 220 конвенций, Совет Европы с момента своего создания в 1949 году стремится поддерживать основные ценности нашего континента – права человека, демократию и верховенство закона. Значит, в Совете Европы участвует 830 миллионов европейцев. Так. Совет Европы успешно разработал систему защиты прав, самым известным механизмом которой является Европейский суд по правам человека. Суд был учрежден в соответствии с Европейской конвенцией о правах человека, которую ратифицировали все государства, члены Совета Европы. Совет Европы был пионером процесса европейской интеграции. Он был основан в 1949 году после Второй мировой войны для обеспечения политического восстановления Европы на основе набора фундаментальных ценностей, утрата которых поставила континент на колени. Значит, символы Европы. У Совета Европы есть свой флаг, гимн и логотип. Европейский флаг с кругом из 12 золотых звезд на ярко-синем фоне является одним из самых известных в мире. Созданный Советом Европы в 1955 году, он был принят Европейским Союзом в 1985 году и стал обычным символом европейского строительства, выходящего за рамки членства в каком-либо конкретном учреждении. Не менее выдающимся является гимн Европы, прелюдия к оде радости из 9-й симфонии Бетховена. Европейский Союз, принятый организацией в 1972 году, также начал использовать гимн в 1986 году. За функционирование Совета Европы отвечают ряд отдельных органов и лиц, каждый из которых играет жизненно важную роль. Это Комитет министров, это руководящий орган Совета Европы, в который входят министры иностранных дел всех государств-членов. Дальше парламентская ассамблея, состоящая из избранных представителей 47 национальных парламентов, съезд местных и региональных властей. Перед Конгрессом стоит задача построения местной и региональной демократии в 47 странах-членах. Европейский суд по правам человека, основанный в 1959 году. Суд представляет собой учреждение, которое позволяет отдельным лицам, группам и правительствам, независимо от национальности, оспаривать предполагаемые нарушения Европейской конвенции о правах человека. Дальше. Комиссар по правам человека. Это независимое учреждение в рамках Совета Европы, которому поручено продвигать осведомленность, уважение к правам человека в 47 странах. Конференция международных неправительственных организаций. Конференция обеспечивает жизненно важную связь между политиками и гражданами и помогает обеспечить, чтобы голос гражданского общества был услышан в Совете Европы. Секретариат. Совет Европы находится в Страсбурге, Франция. В нем работают 2200 человек из 47 государств-членов. Также следующее. Европейские молодежные центры в Страсбурге и Будапеште. Более 5000 молодых людей из всех слоев общества ежегодно посещают учебные заведения, семинары или курсы в европейских молодежных центрах. Более 15 тысяч молодых людей также участвуют в проектах, поддерживаемых Европейским молодежным фондом с целью содействия пониманию, терпимости и солидарности. Бюджет Совета Европы на 2020 год составляет 496 миллионов евро. Бюджет в основном финансируется за счет взносов государств-членов. Национальные взносы основаны на формуле, которая учитывает численность населения и валовый внутренний продукт. Все основные плательщики платят одинаковую ставку в обычный бюджет. Значит, Казахстан подал заявку на статус специального гостя в парламентскую ассамблею в 1999 году. Ассамблея пришла к выводу, что Казахстан может подать заявку на полноправное членство, поскольку 4% его территории находится в Европе, но предоставление статуса специального гостя потребует улучшения в области демократии и прав человека. Эта веха олицетворяет программу Казахстана «Путь в Европу», заслуженную президентом Казахстана в Астане в 2008 году. В декабре 2013 года с этой целью была подписана совместная декларация об укреплении сотрудничества между Казахстаном и Советом Европы в 2014-2015 годах для присоединения Казахстана к многочисленным конвенциям Совета Европы в области уголовного правосудия. Значит, основными преимуществами Европейского Союза является отмена смертной казни, предотвращение пыток, социальная защита, защита национальных меньшинств, киберпреступность, торговля людьми, сексуальная эксплуатация детей, насилие в отношении женщин и домашнее насилие. Значит, основными задачами Совета Европы являются, смотрите, стратегическое партнерство, основанное на политическом диалоге и юридическое сотрудничество, совместные программы, софинансируемые Европейским Союзом с опытом Совета Европы в области верховенства закона, демократия и права человека, ратификация 15 конвенций Европейским Союзом, подготовка к вступлению Союза и Европейская конвенция о правах человека и Дни европейского наследия общее достижение. What does freedom of speech mean? So I didn't manage to.
Was that the question? What is freedom of speech?
What does freedom of speech mean in international law?
Okay. Well, actually, you can use two expressions. Okay, you can use freedom of speech, or you can use freedom of expression, that are very similar but have a small difference. Freedom of speech, from the international law point of view, is a principle. What it does is supporting the freedom of any individual or a group or even a media outlet, a community, for articulating an opinion. Okay, you have the right for articulating your own opinion, your own idea relating to anything, as long as you respect the law, as long as you are not breaking the law, for example, insulting someone. And freedom of speech means, from the legal point of view, that there is no censorship, or there won't be legal sanctions because of talking, because of saying your opinions. And the other part, freedom of expression, you can use it very similarly, but includes acts of seeking, receiving information and ideas without taking into consideration the medium used, okay? So the freedom of expression is the one that is recognized as a human right. Actually, it is in the Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and is considered an international human rights law. It's also, I was talking to you about two covenants at the beginning, it's also protected by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So everyone has a right to hold opinions without interference. This is what the article says.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Кто задавал? Окей, so, что такое свобода слова? Это принцип, в котором каждый индивидуальный человек или группа или сообщество имеет право выражать свои мнения и не нарушая при этом закона. Здесь нету цензуры, и это, значит, согласно закону о правах, в пакте, в статья номер 19 о защите прав человека декларируется. Хорошо, еще следующий вопрос. Next question. How would you assess the level of human rights and freedoms today? Why are they so often violated?
Actually, I think that I was talking about the United Nations perspective and also the Council of Europe's perspective, and both international organizations, what they do is fighting the violation of human rights. So I think that along the last years, since these two organizations exist, there has been an improvement of the protection of human rights. It's true that now there is, unluckily, there are violations of economic, social, cultural rights, and this happens when a state fails its obligations for ensuring that the human rights are enjoyed without any discrimination, and also are respected, are protected, are fulfilled. And usually when there is a violation of a human right, is linked to other kind of criminal act or other kind of violation of other rights. There are many examples, but this could be a very long story. I can say, answering that question, I think it's very interesting because this is important to understand that one of you is asking this because has the feeling that the human rights are often violated. Okay, so there are lists that you can check. For example, Amnesty International is an international organization it's an NGO as Almaty Nomad. Okay, Amnesty International makes an annual report, and there Amnesty International says where are the violations of human rights laws. Okay, and they make a list saying where the violation of human rights is happening more often. For example, in the last report, I remember was very impressive to see the United States as one of the main human rights violators because of the Trump presidency. Maybe it was a political decision. This I don't know, but was saying that I remember that Donald Trump was violating the U.S. Constitution because was discriminating on the basis of religion. Okay, I don't know how this happened, how this finished, because I was not following the prosecution. Also because of the hate rhetoric. So the United States was considered one of the 10 global countries violating human rights. There is also Venezuela, where there are many, many big problems. Also, the president has been globally condemned because Venezuela is now considered the worst human rights country in the world. Okay, and people are struggling. People can't access to food in a country that you have to think that is a country with a lot of petrol resources. Okay, they have a lot of oil. They are very rich, and people can't eat. It's amazing what is happening, what is going on there. There are shortages. Also, the currency, their money has collapsed. There is hyperinflation, so people can't buy basic goods. People can't eat. It's terrible how Venezuela is. So I remember that there was the US, there was Venezuela, there is also Yemen, where there is a civil war taking place. There is a very huge humanitarian crisis there. More than 2 million people requiring assistance for starvation. Also in Turkey, there is a lot of trouble now because of the last tendencies of the president that is supposed to be violating human rights. In Syria, where there is also a civil war that is a catastrophe, it's terrible. Russia, President Putin, you maybe have been following the news lately that in Russia they are poisoning, for example, journalists. Journalists are making their jobs and they are being poisoned sometimes by someone. It usually happens when they are criticizing some measures from the government. So it's totally arbitrary. Or Saudi Arabia, who was, you may remember how actually the owners of the country were chopping a journalist in Istanbul, in the consulate, in the Saudi Arabia consulate in Istanbul. They were chopping a journalist who had also American nationality, or Myanmar, or some problems in China, in Australia. So there are many countries where there are still improvements to do, but we have to consider the whole picture. And the whole picture, in my opinion, is that in many countries, human rights are protected. And I have to say that, for example, in Europe, we are very lucky because we have a very, very, very high conscience of protection of human rights. Hope to have answered your question.
Окей, thank you. Значит, ответ на ваш вопрос. Международные организации, благодаря международным организациям, которые защищают права человека, ситуация, конечно, улучшается. Но согласно статистическим данным, знаете такую организацию, наверное, Amnesty List, там существуют такие прецеденты, допустим, в США Трамп нарушил права на почве дискриминации, на почве религии. Значит, в Венесуэле очень тяжелая ситуация, так как там это очень богатая страна, там много природных ресурсов, особенно бензина, но людям нечего есть, у них нет доступа к еде, и проблема с валютой, гиперинфляция. Также в Сирии идет нарушение прав. То есть так как из-за гражданской войны 2 миллиона человек голодают, и они просят о помощи. Также в России много журналистов были отравлены. Также в Саудовской Аравии, да, тоже происходит много убийств журналистов. И ситуация как бы не очень хорошая. Но и в Европе ситуация намного лучше. благодаря таким организациям и благодаря высокому уровню сознательности людей по защите прав. Так, и следующий вопрос. Is the absence of censorship a right of journalists?
This is the question, Madina?
Yes, is
okay.
the absence of...
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yes, okay, censorship, yes, of course. Censorship is the possibility of forbidding someone to talk, the suppression of speech, to forbid someone the public communication, on the basis that the information that that journalist is dealing with is considered harmful or sensitive or inconvenient. So censorship is always conducted mainly by the states, by politicians who don't like to be criticized, whose decisions want to have a kind of want to go away with them without having any possible person talking about them. So also some private organizations, sometimes given that many of you are journalists, I have been told by some journalists how their own bosses, the owners of the media, are forbidding to publish something, are exercising censorship, which is in the end the suppression of speech. So a journalist needs to be absolutely free of censorship, because, well, you have to consider that maybe censorship in the member states belonging to the Council of Europe, the 47 states, is forbidden. So you can't you can censor anything, okay? There is no way for censoring. But many other countries, I know that there are strong protections for censorship by law, and maybe sometimes used, maybe sometimes they don't use them, but a journalist, from my point of view, actually from a, let's say, Western international law point of view, censorship should be absolutely forbidden. Also, you have to consider that there are limits. You can't say anything about anyone. You can't say something brutal that is not true. You have to be close to the facts. There are limits. The limits are the limits that any law can impose, as not insulting or not saying critics using fake information. A journalist has a deontology, has a code that he's supposed to protect. So I would answer that, of course, if a journalist someone is censoring him, should fight against, because it's a right to talk and to express their opinions.
Thank you. Значит, ответ на ваш вопрос. Цензура не должна существовать, и свобода слова должна быть поддержана, особенно в профессии журналистов. И 47 стран, членов Совета Европы, они следуют этому закону, что свободе слова. И я считаю, что на Западе особенно цензуру должны запретить. Журналист должен быть максимально правдивым в выражении своих идей и в предоставлении информации, соблюдать кодекс журналиста и быть максимально честным в описании фактов, которые он хочет представить общественности. Окей, спасибо. Теперь следующий вопрос. Давайте. What is the situation in Spain concerning the freedom of speech? So, what can you say about it?
Well, this I have to answer it very quick, because there is no problem at all. There is absolute freedom of speech. There are no limits to it, just if, as I was saying before, as if you are saying something very bad about someone that you shouldn't say, that you are interfering in people's honor, okay? You can't interfere in people's honor. So there are legal limits, but not only to journalists, but to everyone. So there is absolute freedom of speech.
Okay, thank you. Значит, в Испании такая обстановка, что свобода слова полностью существует, и нет проблем с этим. То есть журналист и даже любой гражданин Испании может свободно выражать свои мысли, свои идеи. То есть абсолютная свобода слова. Okay, tell us about the most interesting cases from your practice on the protection of human rights and freedoms.
Well, thank you. Yes, I can. Well, there are some, when you work as a lawyer, you are working for private individuals. So you are not allowed to talk about private cases. But when I was working in the Council of Europe, I remember that I was working in certain situations that were trying to improve through different commissions, were trying to improve the human rights situations in certain countries. And I remember particularly the Constitution of Georgia. Georgia is a country in the South Caucasus, and they have a constitution very young constitution from 1995. This constitution was born like some years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So many people were trying to influence this constitution. And then during the process in the following years, the constitution was needing some amendments, okay? And these amendments were meant to change certain powers that the president of the country was holding for himself. And so, for example, I think it was time ago, but he could dismiss parliament, he could appoint the prime minister. In the end, there were several works, and we were preparing from this Council of Europe standards, the Council of Europe member states standards, amendments to the constitution for reducing powers of the president of Georgia in favor of the prime minister who was voted and the government who was in charge of the parliament. So this took time and was very interesting. And I have also been working this with actually with Madina Shilova in the field of the Asia Global Institute. We have a project for working in. We want to decrease the populism. Okay, populism. We think that is poisoning democracy. Populism is poisoning democracy in Europe because populists are giving simple messages to very complicated topics. So there are things. There are fields that are quite complex, and populists are simplifying the messages for getting votes, but they don't have the requirements for solving problems. So we are working in a project now with the Asia Global Institute for reducing the populist power and influence. That is very interesting. I don't know if it's going to be very, very useful or not, because we are just thinking about it and constructing it. That tries to protect basic rights, human rights, constitutional rights, and because populists are attacking these rights now, mainly inside the European Union, there are many populists that are in governments or that are supporting governments. So I'm very proud of working in this topic because I have been suffering populism myself, and I think that we can change the situation, or at least I hope that we are going to change the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. То есть ответ на ваш вопрос. Так, и самое интересное дело, да? Значит, он работал раньше юристом в международной компании, но когда он работал в Совете Европы, у них было дело по внесению поправок в Конституцию Грузии. И, значит, самая основная задача была то, что уменьшить популизм. Это, то есть, значит, это отравление демократии. То есть популизм это является самой основной помехой в развитии демократии. И этим он занимался совместно с Мадиной Ашиловой, участвовал в проекте, и они до сих пор занимаются этим вопросом по сокращению популизма.
We have a lot of questions, but unfortunately our time is over. So we have another speaker, Дэниел Барр from United States of America. I want to say, Sebastian, a lot of thanks to you for joining us, for telling
Thank
us
you.
great presentation. I hope our cooperation will continue in next maybe lecture, because we have a lot of students and we have a lot of questions from our students, and I think the interest will increase. So thank you very much, Sebastian, for joining us. And I will give opportunity to
Yeah.
Alibek. Please, Alibek.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to join to us. I would like to present our guest, special guest from United States, Дэниел Барр. Is a professor at the Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, University of Arizona. He has very rich experience in work law, in constitutional law, also employment in media and political law. Also, I would like to say he works as a journalist too and teacher at university too. Daniel, how are you doing? Thank you for joining to us. It's so early time too. Can you hear us, Daniel?
Okay. Good morning from Berkeley, California, where the sun is yet to come up.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me here today. What I thought I would do is give a brief overview of media law in the United States, the rights and protections of reporters, and then be available for questions. In fact, I'm really far more interested in what your questions may be than whatever I have to say. So I don't know how you do these things, but people should feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions. What I'd like to talk about today are several things. First is what the law is in the United States regarding access to the news. Then what the law is regarding interferences with the news gathering process, whether it be subpoenas on reporters or prior restraints, which are orders that people cannot publish something in advance, libel law, privacy law, and then get into the deep dive into libel law, the common law of libel that came over from Britain, and the constitutional aspects of libel law in the United States, which are unique to the United States, and then get into a few other things regarding maybe confidential sources and recording of conversations. First, let me talk about access to the news. And before I do that, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I was a journalist for several years at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix, Arizona. My wife runs a publication that she founded called Raising Arizona Kids. My older son was a reporter at Politico in Washington, D.C. And for the last 35 years, I've been a lawyer representing media interests, whether it be reporters for print or broadcast publications, and now online publications in the United States. First, let me talk about access to the news. In the United States, reporters have a constitutional right to attend court proceedings, both under federal constitutional law, the First Amendment, and many state constitutions have a specific provision mandating access to court proceedings. A courtroom can be closed under only the most stringent of conditions. You have to show not only the need to close the courtroom, you have to show that less restrictive alternatives could not work, and that closing the courtroom would be effective. As many of you know, a lot of times you can deny access to something, but it's not effective because you can get information from someplace else. So it's very difficult to close a courtroom in the United States. When you can close one would be, for instance, if you have a trade secret trial and they're discussing in the courtroom the specific trade secrets. Maybe in some criminal matters where there's an identification regarding somebody still at large. This wouldn't happen at a trial, but it might happen at a preliminary proceeding, and with that, you could only close it for a short amount of time. Sometimes the interest of national security is raised, but that interest rarely wins the day. It did not win the day in the case of the New York Times versus the United States, where the Nixon administration sought to prevent the publication of the Pentagon Papers, which was a history written by a contractor for the US government of a history of the Vietnam War. So in addition to access to court proceedings, there's also a constitutional, in many states also a statutory right to access to court records. You can go into a court and review the court files. And obviously that's incredibly important. People file, whatever information about the criminal or civil trials there, and it's vital to get access to that. You also have access to search warrants in the United States, and that is dependent on a state-by-state thing. In Arizona, you can get access to a search warrant and its materials 4 days after the search warrant has been returned, which means the search warrant has been served on a residence, the search has been done, and 4 days later you get to see the search warrant. And what's important about that is you see not only what's been searched and perhaps seized from a home or a business, but you also get something called the probable cause affidavit, the search warrant. And in the probable cause affidavit, the government really lays out its theory of the case, why it believes that a police search of a residence or a business must be conducted. And it has to convince a judge of probable cause that a crime has been committed, or to convince the judge to issue the search warrant in the first place. So the probable cause affidavit can be very informative to reporters in reporting about criminal activity or alleged criminal activity. Then we have laws regarding using cameras in the courtroom. Since 1981, when the US Supreme Court issued a ruling in 1981 saying that it was not unconstitutional, not an invasion of due process, to allow cameras in courtrooms in the United States. And since that time, there are 49 states that allow cameras in courtrooms. In Arizona, in California, and other places, cameras in courts have become routine. So, that's something that's quite significant. There are streaming services. There used to be something called Court TV on cable television in the United States. There's now an online version, and I forget exactly what it's called, but they provide live coverage of trials throughout the United States and hearings and the like. A camera in Arizona can be prohibited only by a judge stating specifically on the record the facts that mandate that a camera not be held in the courtroom. So putting aside access to the courts, US law also provides access to public records. In federal law, it's called the Federal Freedom of Information Act, otherwise known as FOI or FOIA. States have their own public records law. Arizona has a public records law that was passed in 1901, which was 11 years before Arizona became a state. Arizona became the 48th state of the United States in 1912. And these laws provide access to records, and it depends from state to state. But Arizona provides very broad access to records that are created or maintained by a public body. And a public body is defined as any body that is supported in whole or in part by public funds. So you can see that's a very broad definition. So even if something is not a governmental body, if it's supported by public funds, it is considered a public body for the public records law, and journalists can get access to the records of that. And as we all know, people say the darndest things in emails that they would never say in press conferences or in interviews. It not only applies to emails and official documents filed within the government, but things like text records, governmental officials using their phones to text back and forth. And it would apply to their private texts or private email accounts if those are being used for governmental purposes. So if a governmental official is using his or her private email, but using it for governmental purposes as a way to try to elude detection from the media, those emails are considered public records. A public record is presumed to be available for access in Arizona, and it can only be withheld if there is a specific statute saying that the record is not subject to the public records law, or if the public body can show the probability of a specific material harm to an interest of privacy, confidentiality, or the best interests of the state. So the burden is very much on the state to withhold a public record, and it makes that burden, it may not be able to withhold the entire record, but only portions of that record which they can make that burden. So they have to then redact the public record, black out certain lines and release the remainder. Under federal law, the Freedom of Information Act is structured so, again, access is presumed, but there are 9 types of records that are considered not available for public inspection. They can deal with records having to do with, implicate privacy, records concerning law enforcement, records that are inter and intra-agency memos going back and forth, geological records and the like. So there are 9 exemptions to the Freedom of Information Act. Sometimes I say there's also a 10th exemption, which is the government doesn't want to give it to you. The Freedom of Information Act is different from the public records law of Arizona and other states in that it has a specific timeline for the government to respond. Under the Freedom of Information Act, the government has 20 days to respond to your initial request. And that doesn't mean that they have to give you the documents at 20 days. They just need to respond and say, hi, we got your request, we're working on it. The federal government can then take, a considerably long amount of time responding to your request. And a lot of times reporters do not get responsive information for months after they've made the request, and in some cases years after they've made the request. In contrast, in Arizona, government must respond to a public records request promptly. And while the statute doesn't define promptly, if the records are only a few pages, that's meant to be within a few days. Obviously, if the records are, 20,000 pages or a large amount of electronic information that requires legal review and redaction, that would be longer. But as a practical matter, the Freedom of Information Act, the federal law in the United States, is not an effective tool for daily journalism and is used more by book authors or reporters doing much longer term projects. In addition to access to records, reporters in the United States have statutory rights to attend meetings of public bodies, what's often called the Open Meetings Law. In Arizona, any multi-membered public body, which is a city council or the town council or school board, any body that has more than one person on it, they have to hold their meetings in public. And what's defined as a meeting is whenever a quorum of the group gets together for discussion. So if a city council is 7 people and 4 of them get together, even if they're getting together for dinner or to go to a sports event and stuff, they have to post notice of the meeting. Now, sports event is a little extreme, but what we found in the past is that governmental officials, when they get together for social reasons, they're like everybody else. Is like when you get together with people from work for a social reason, what do you wind up talking about? You talk about work. So when governmental officials get together for a social event, they often wind up talking about work, which are items coming before the public body. Public officials have to post notice when they get together in a quorum. The notice has to be posted 24 hours ahead of the meeting. It has to state with some specificity what is going to be discussed at the meeting. And if you then go to the meeting and the public body starts discussing things that are not on the agenda, that is a violation of the open meetings law. They cannot discuss things that are not on the agenda. And Arizona law provides the sanction of holding that whatever is discussed in the meeting to be null and void. A court would hold that what was ever decided at the meeting didn't take place, and the public body would have to correct that. So that's my discussion regarding access to information. Let me talk about interference with the news process and get a little gulp of coffee too. First, let me talk about subpoenas served on the news media. And subpoenas are commands from a court that you appear to provide testimony or provide your documents in a legal case. The subpoenas can be issued in criminal cases by law enforcement or defense attorneys. They can be issued in civil cases by attorneys concerning business disputes or all sorts of things. The media fights against subpoenas because they do not want to be the fact finders for lawyers or the government. They're not the agents of the government. There are certain laws preventing the compelled testimony of reporters in cases. First of all, in most states, there's something called shield laws. And a shield law allows a reporter to keep the confidentiality of sources if he or she is promised confidentiality. In some states like Arizona, a promise of confidentiality is not necessary to keep the name of the source confidential. It also applies to providing records or your notes regarding interviews. The government has a very high burden to make to show that it should get access to a reporter's notes or documents. What the government has to show in most states and federal law is that it cannot get the information elsewhere, and that the information is crucial to the trial and relevant to the trial. So, for instance, if you were to interview, say, we'll call this person Mr. X, and the government wants to subpoena you and get your notes from interviewing Mr. X, you would fight back and say, well, wait a second, have you talked to Mr. X yet? Because if you haven't talked to Mr. X yet, or talked to people who are knowledgeable about what he has to say or what he's done, then you can't subpoena me as the reporter yet, because you haven't exhausted your other paths of information to get that testimony. The same would apply to documents. If I've received documents from Mr. X, then you should be able to subpoena those from Mr. X and not from me. So those are the protections concerning subpoenas served on the press. Another interference with the news gathering process is what's called prior restraints, where the government orders you not to print something or broadcast something in advance. In the United States, that practice was held to be unconstitutional in a case in the 1920s out of Minnesota called Neer versus Minnesota. Since that time, the government has an extremely high burden to prevent the publication of material. I mean, the Nixon administration couldn't do it in the Pentagon Papers case in the 1970s, and at various times, federal and state governments have tried to prohibit the publication of material citing national security and the like, sometimes trade secrets and the like, and they have almost always failed. There was a case in the 1990s, I believe, involving some information the CIA had regarding Manuel Noriega, who was at that time the dictator of Panama. And that case involved CNN, and the government was able to force CNN to not broadcast certain material for a few days. But for the most part, prior restraints are held to be unconstitutional in the United States. Now let me talk about libel. You all undoubtedly have libel laws in your country. In the United States, the law of libel, the common law of libel comes from Great Britain. And the law of libel as it existed in the United States before 1964 was what it is in Great Britain, in Canada, and Australia today. And under that, the common law of the British common law of libel was that a plaintiff, when he filed a lawsuit, that the story was presumed to be false, that the burden of proving truth was upon the defendant, upon the newspaper or the television station, the reporter, that damages were presumed. That all changed in the United States in 1964 in a case called New York Times versus Sullivan. And that case arose out of the civil rights movement in the United States. And what was happening is there were various public officials in the southern part of the United States that were bringing libel suits against the news media, especially the news media from large northern cities like Washington, D.C. and New York, to either prevent or dissuade them from covering the civil rights movement. And what New York Times versus Sullivan rose from was not even a story in the New York Times. It had to do with an advertisement in the New York Times. There was an advertisement called Heed Their Rising Voices, and it was one of these full-page ads that ran in the New York Times, signed by various celebrities and political figures supporting Martin Luther King and making various factual assertions about what had happened in various incidents in the South. There was a public official in Montgomery, Alabama named L.B. Sullivan who filed a lawsuit saying that some of the statements made in this advertisement, which he is not even mentioned in, defamed him. There was a trial in Alabama and the jury was out for like 20 minutes and came back with a verdict of $600,000 against the New York Times, which in 1960 was a lot of money, certainly a lot more money than it is today. And the case eventually wound up at the US Supreme Court. At the US Supreme Court, in an opinion written by Justice William Brennan, the court held that for public officials, people like L.B. Sullivan, who was a county commissioner, that public officials had to prove something called actual malice, which was, actual malice means that they had to prove that the reporter knew, subjectively knew at the time of publication, that whatever he or she was publishing was false. and they had to do so with convincing clarity. And what convincing clarity is a higher burden of proof than what the usual burden of proof in civil cases is, which is by a preponderance of evidence. So if you think of it as a scale, preponderance of evidence is just a slight shift like this, but convincing proof is that. So it was a significant change in the law, and the reason that the Supreme Court did so, it said that in covering matters of public importance and where public officials are involved, the press needed the breathing room to be able to make mistakes. And if those mistakes were not deliberate, then they should not be held liable for doing so. And what happened after New York Times versus Sullivan is that the law regarding actual malice and who had to prove it was expanded. When the Supreme Court said, in addition to public officials, that public figures had to prove actual malice. And as years went by, it defined public figures in two ways. One were all-purpose public figures, which are people who are known far and wide by everybody. And those people are fairly rare. Actually, it's, for instance, Barack Obama today would be an all-purpose public figure. Everybody knows who he is. Well-known entertainers would be considered general purpose public figures, especially if they're socially active. The more common type of public figure is what's called the limited purpose public figure. And limited purpose public figures are people who have inserted themselves into public debate on some particular issue. Now, it doesn't actually mean that they have to be debating someone, but for instance, if there is a developer who wants to build, say, a controversial building in your town that has, created a lot of dispute regarding zoning and density and the like, that person would be considered to be a limited purpose public figure. People who are engaged in any sort of civic dispute, various businesses, corporations can be considered to be limited purpose public figures. For instance, let's take if you're writing an article about global warming, and you would write, include in that article the CEO of Exxon or other fossil fuel companies, or the CEO of the solar businesses and the like. Those people might be considered to be limited purpose public figures concerning the issue of global warming and how to deal with that. So that the law on libel today in the United States is different for public officials and public figures versus private figures, and private figures are most people. For public figures and public officials, they must show, to prevail in a libel case, actual malice, which is that the reporter subjectively knew at the time of publication that the information was false, and they must do so with convincing clarity. For private people, the law is sort of what it still is in Britain, which is a plaintiff only needs to show negligence, which is that the reporter was simply sloppy in reporting what he or she reported. They don't have to show that they actually knew that the information was false. They merely have to show negligence. What is different, however, even for private figures, is that in issues of public concern, the US Supreme Court has held that the burden should shift. If the story is an issue of public concern, even if it involves a private figure, then the plaintiff must prove falsity, as opposed to the plaintiff having to prove truth. In a regular private figure case, if it's not a matter of public concern, the plaintiff has to prove that the story was true. And as you probably know, in many lawsuits, whoever has the burden of proof a lot of times winds up losing. and because all things being equal, if something is the preponderance of evidence, if you're the one who has to show a little more, it's going to be more difficult for you to win. Let me talk briefly now about privacy laws in the United States. During the last 20 years, the issue of privacy is something that's obviously gotten far more attention than ever before in our digital world. And the feelings about privacy are different around the world. I know in many European countries, perhaps yours, there is a thought of that, for instance, in France, it is, even if the article is of public concern, if you write something about someone 10 years after the event occurred, it doesn't matter whether it's a public concern, it could be considered to be an invasion of privacy. Even if that person is a public official, even in one case, if the person is a premier of France. In Germany, Helmut Schmidt, I believe, won a privacy suit concerning the fact that he was wearing a hairpiece. Something like that would simply not exist in the United States, where a public figure would have to show actual malice and would not be considered to have any privacy interest at all. But in places like Europe, for instance, there is the growing feeling of, for instance, the right to be forgotten, and the law of the European Union, where Google and other search platforms can be instructed by people to take down articles about them. Or so, for instance, if you do something dumb when you're a teenager that 20 years later as an adult, people shouldn't see that you committed some stupid crime of vandalism or something like that. In the United States, we do not have that feeling of the right to be forgotten yet. But I think it's also something that's also growing, that people think, boy, is there a permanent record of everything that I do in my life? And we see commercially how companies use our data, to know everything there is to know about us. For instance, when any of us do searches online, we see advertisements for things that we may have just bought or looked at, or things that we will look at on social media. There are 3 real privacy torts in the United States. One is called the public disclosure of private facts. For that, truth is not a defense, because it is the very fact that something is true that makes it most damaging. So, if you take something that's incredibly private about somebody and publish it, you could be liable under that tort. There's another tort called intrusion, and intrusion is something where, for instance, you're trespassing in somebody's house, or you're using a telephonic photo lens to see inside of somebody's house. Now, intrusion can occur for things that you can see outside like anybody else. So if you take a photo of somebody who is out on the street and they don't like it, they don't have a privacy right to prevent you from taking a photo, but they do have a privacy right of, for instance, if they're in their backyard and you're peering over the fence and taking a photo of them, or reporting on their activities on their private property where they can't be seen, that would be considered to be intrusion. And finally, there's a privacy tort called commercial misappropriation, and that applies a lot of times to celebrities. I mean, I'm in the state of California right now, where there's a specific statute that protects mostly people in Hollywood for having their likeness or name misappropriated by people, like for commercials or political commercials or things like that. There have been actors like Dustin Hoffman and Cher. There have been people who have singers like Bette Midler and the like, who their material or their likenesses have been used for commercials. For instance, Bette Midler had a song that was used by the Ford Motor Company without her permission. And she filed a lawsuit for that, for commercial misappropriation. And the lawsuit eventually was settled, but for a significant amount of money. Let me talk about two other things here, and then I'll open it up for questions. One is the media's use of material that has been stolen or provided to it by whistleblowers. And the law in that area is the media is free to publish that material if it did not participate or encourage the theft. So you have, going back 4 years ago, in the US election, around this time, 2 weeks before the election, we had the WikiLeaks, the dump of all these Hillary Clinton emails that were hacked and stolen from the Democratic National Committee. The news media in the United States published many of that material. That material was unquestionably stolen, but because the news media did not participate in that theft, nor did it encourage it, it could provide that material. The same is true of the famous Pentagon Papers case, where Daniel Ellsberg copied this history of the Vietnam War, but it was a document that was highly classified. And Ellsberg violated a law in doing so, but his violation of the law cannot be transferred over to the news media for receiving that information or publishing it if it did not participate in that crime. And finally, let me talk about the recording of conversations. In the United States, there are what's called one-party states and two-party states. In a two-party state, it requires that both the person recording the conversation and the person who is not recording the conversation be informed of the conversation is being recorded. So for instance, if I were to call one of you up and interview you over the phone and I'm recording the conversation, I would need to get your consent before recording the conversation, or else it would be considered to be a crime. And the reason for such a two-party restriction is to protect against wiretapping. There are roughly 12 states in the United States that are two-party states, and California is one of them. The rest of the states are one-party states, which means that only one person to the conversation need know that it's being recorded. So if I'm calling one of you to interview you and I'm recording you, I don't have to tell you that the phone call is being recorded because I know that it's being recorded. So the majority of states are one-party states. There's one caveat to that, however, is if you're going to broadcast that on radio or television, the Federal Communications Commission, otherwise known as the FCC, requires that both parties know that the conversation is being recorded. So even if you're in a one-party state, say if I'm in Arizona, which is a one-party state, and I know the conversation is being recorded, well, it might be legal under Arizona law to record that conversation. If I were then use that conversation on a TV broadcast, if I were to broadcast any portion of it, it would be considered to be illegal under the FCC law because I had not informed the person on the other side of the conversation that's being recorded. So I know that's all very quick, sort of lightning view of US media law. And so I'm now sort of interested in what your questions may be.
Окей, тогда я переведу, да, быстро?
Да, конечно. Daniel, we translate, okay? If you are not mind your speech, yeah? It takes maybe a few minutes. Thank you very much for your speech. Okay, thank you, Madina.
Для начала давайте разберемся, что такое публичные записи. Дэниел начал свой рассказ, что такое публичные записи, public records, да? Это документы или фрагменты информации, которые не считаются конфиденциальными и обычно имеют отношение к поведению правительства. Хотя публичные записи представляют собой записи публичных деловых операций, они не обязательно доступны без ограничений, хотя законодательство о свободе информации, которое постепенно вводилось во многих юрисдикциях с 1960-х годов, облегчило доступ. Каждое правительство имеет политику и правила, регулирующие доступность информации, содержащейся в публичных архивах. Распространенным ограничением является то, что данные о человеке обычно недоступны для других. Во многих штатах законодательные собрания штатов часто освобождены от законов о публичных записях, которые применяются к должностным лицам, исполнительной власти штата и местным должностным лицам. Особое значение имела эволюция общего права на доступ к судебным записям для проверки и копирования. Ожидание, заложенное в праве общего права на доступ к судебным записям, состоит в том, что любое лицо может прийти в офис секретаря суда в рабочее время и потребовать проверки судебных протоколов с почти мгновенным доступом. Такое право является главной гарантией неприкосновенности судов. Любое решение о сокрытии судебных материалов требует постановления на печать. Право на доступ к судебным протоколам также имеет центральное значение для свободы. В Соединенных Штатах право общего права на доступ к судебным записям для проверки и копирования было подтверждено Верховным судом США в деле Никсона и Уорнера, где суд установил различные части права на доступ к судебным записям, как неотъемлемая часть 1, 4, 6 и 14 поправок. В Соединенных Штатах доступ к судебным материалам регулируется гражданскими правами в поправках Конституции Соединенных Штатов, а не законом о свободе информации. По мере того, как судебные протоколы становятся все более доступными, опасения по поводу нарушения конфиденциальности частной информации становятся серьезной проблемой. В прошлом получение судебных протоколов требовало, чтобы люди физически приходили в здание суда и запрашивали документы, что делало соображение конфиденциальности существенно устаревшим. Однако из-за относительной легкости, с которой люди теперь могут получить доступ к этим записям, высокочувствительная информация находится под угрозой публичного использования. В штате Аризона вы должны сделать запрос 20 дней заранее, чтобы получить доступ к информации. В некоторых судебных заседаниях используют камеры для записи судебного заседания. Также, сейчас, значит, теперь поговорим о клевете, да? Что такое клевета? Так. Здесь Дэниел разбирал, что такое клевета. Клевета – это юридический термин, описывающий письменную форму клеветы, которую словарь определяет как ложное или неоправданное ущемление чьей-либо хорошей репутации. Дела о клевете, которые являются частью гражданского, а не уголовного судебного разбирательства, могут рассматриваться присяжными, и решение о том, напечатало ли издание клеветническую информацию о ком-либо, остается на их усмотрении. Если это так, то присяжным также предстоит решить, сколько пострадавшему лицу и какой денежный ущерб он имеет право получить в качестве компенсации. Сегодня в Соединенных Штатах около 90% всех судебных процессов по делу о клевете рассматриваются присяжными. Создатели Конституции США гарантировали свободу печати, вписав это в защиту в первую поправку к Биллю о правах. Несмотря на это, Верховный суд Соединенных Штатов, Высший суд Америки, в течение многих лет отказывался защищать СМИ от судебных исков о клевете, полагаясь на первую поправку. Вместо этого законы о клевете варьировались от штата к штату без единой согласованной нормы в стране. Все изменилось в 1964 году, когда Верховный суд вынес постановление, которое произвело революцию в законе о клевете в Соединенных Штатах. Знаменитое дело по делу Нью-Йорк Таймс против Салливана раз и навсегда создало национальное правило, которое более полно соответствовало гарантиям свободы прессы. Первой поправки. В своем постановлении суд постановил, что государственные должностные лица больше не могут успешно возбуждать иск о клевете, если репортеры или редакторы не виновны в фактическом злонамеренном умысле при публикации ложных заявлений о них. Позднее Верховный суд распространил свое так называемое правило Салливана на общественных деятелей, то есть на лиц, не занимающих государственных должностей, но все еще достойных освещения в СМИ из-за своего авторитета в глазах общественности. На протяжении многих лет американские суды постановляли, что в эту категорию входят знаменитости в сфере развлечений, известные писатели, спортсмены и другие лица, которые часто привлекают внимание средств массовой информации. Для чисто частных лиц проверка на доказательства клеветы не так сложна. Хотя постановления Верховного суда, такие как решение Салливана, применяются повсюду в Соединенных Штатах, в большинстве штатов по-прежнему действуют собственные законы о клевете, которые распространяются на частных лиц. Обычно эти законы требуют, чтобы общественные деятели, которые считают, что их освободили, доказали халатность журналиста, опубликовав ложную информацию о них. Так, дальше. Дальше мы рассматриваем так privacy laws in the USA. Законы частной privacy laws in the USA — это суть закона проистекает из права на неприкосновенность частной жизни, которая в широком смысле определяет как право быть оставленным в покое. Обычно сюда не включаются личные дела или действия, которые могут обоснованно представлять общественный интерес, например, дела знаменитостей или участников важных событий. Нарушение права на неприкосновенность частной жизни может быть основанием для иска о возмещении ущерба против физического или юридического лица, нарушающего право. К ним относятся право 4 поправки на свободу от необоснованного обыска или изъятия, право 1 поправки на свободу собраний и право на надлежащие правовые процедуры 14 поправки, признанное Верховным судом как защищающее общее право на неприкосновенность частной жизни, в семье, браке и так далее. Вторжение в уединение происходит, когда злоумышленник намеренно вторгается физически с помощью электронных средств или иным образом в личное пространство, уединение или уединение человека, в частные дела или интересы человека, используя физические органы чувств. Так, следующее. И публичное раскрытие частных фактов возникает, когда одно лицо раскрывает информацию, которая не вызывает общественного интереса, и разглашение которой оскорбило бы человека. Раскрытие частных фактов включает публикацию или широкое распространение малоизвестных частных фактов, не заслуживающих освещения в печать, не являющихся частью публичных записей, публичных разбирательств, не представляющих общественного интереса, и было бы оскорбительным для человека, если бы это было обнародовано. И последнее — это присвоение, которое часто используется в сфере несанкционированное использование имени или изображения для человека для получения некоторых выгод. Это используется среди селебрити, часто используется среди селебрити. И последнее, о чем нужно сказать, это запись разговора. Существует правило, закон, которое гласит, что если в разговоре участвуют 2 человек, и существует правило, что оба должны дать свое согласие на запись разговора, иначе это считается преступлением. Этот закон существует в 12 штатах США. И есть также one party state, это когда один человек из собеседников должен обязательно знать о записи разговора. Второй может и не знать то, что происходит запись разговора. И это считается легальным. Вот это, наверное, все, что я хотела сказать. Вкратце. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое, Мадина. Yeah, thank you very much. We have a questions here.
Okay, before I start, Medina, that is probably the most impressive thing I've heard in a long time.
So the question is, what are the restrictions on the activities of journalists in the United States?
What are the protections or restrictions?
Restrictions.
Well, it's sort of like what I discussed. I mean, the restrictions have to do with the laws of libel. Restrictions have to do with, being able to go into certain public buildings. You can go in certain public areas, but you can't just, walk into somebody's office a lot of times unannounced. But besides that, there really aren't that many restrictions on journalists in the United States. Of course, with the changing media environment and the changing business model for journalists now, where the old business model, which was supported by advertising, is collapsing, and more journalists are working as freelancers. They don't have libel insurance, for instance, or even if they do, they can't afford lawyers to, help them get public documents when that's being denied, or defend them from threats of libel suits. And so it's not so much restrictions, but self-restrictions that reporters put on themselves to prevent themselves or to lessen the risk of facing a libel suit. But there's no restriction about what somebody can or cannot print. I guess there's a restriction. For instance, it would be criminal to print photos of like child pornography. There are statutes regarding that. But there are very few other restrictions on reporters.
Окей, thank you. Значит, какие существуют ограничения в деятельности журналистов в Соединенных Штатах? Это, конечно, закон, связанный с клеветой, поход в публичные заведения, места, допустим, нужно специальное разрешение, чтобы туда пойти. И старая бизнес-модель, она сейчас рушится. Из-за этого много появилось фрилансеров, журналистов, которые не ставят себе никаких запретов, и у них нету защиты, и в связи с этим это тоже может вызвать некоторые проблемы. Следующий вопрос, пожалуйста. Do journalists have access to public records?
Yes, journalists have access to public records like anybody else in the United States.
Так, значит, ответ. Имеют ли журналисты доступ к публичным записям? И ответ – да. В США все имеют доступ. Журналисты имеют доступ к публичным записям. Дальше. Does the United States have laws on racial discrimination or incitement to ethnic hatred? And what threatens a journalist for violating this law?
Well, I'll break it down. First, there are laws regarding racial discrimination. There's civil rights laws having to do with preventing people from discriminating on for basis of employment or housing or the like. There have been various attempts to pass laws regarding, incitement to ethnic hatred, what we call hate crimes. The difficulty with a hate crime or a law regarding incitement to ethnic hatred is proving subjectively what's in somebody's mind at the time. Those laws have had problems in the court. However, your incitement to ethnic hatred can be used as a factor in increasing your sentence should you be convicted of crime. So for instance, if if I'm inciting a riot or do something to incite a riot, and I'm convicted of that, and the reason for inciting the riot is ethnic hatred, that could be considered in increasing my sentence. The same reason as an assault on someone. If I'm convicted of, say, assaulting someone or shooting them or stabbing them, if the reason for doing so is ethnic hatred, that could be considered in giving me a more stringent sentence. As far as what threatens a journalist for violating a law, I don't know. I mean, what we're seeing right now in the United States, and you're as familiar with it as I am, is what social media is doing regarding ethnic hatred and the like. And we've seen Twitter and Facebook and others start to take down postings by various groups that incite ethnic hatred. And there's a lot of dispute about how effective that is, or whether Facebook and Twitter should be doing more of it, should be doing less of it. But they're becoming far more active in doing so, because as we see, there are all sorts of white supremacist groups around the world that are using social media to promote ethnic hatred.
Окей, thank you. Значит, вопрос. Значит, в США есть у них законы по расовой дискриминации и подстрекательству этнической ненависти? И что угрожает журналисту за нарушение этих прав? То есть у журналиста те же права, как и у любого другого гражданина, и этническое подстрекательство этнической ненависти и расовой дискриминации, это может вызвать только более строгое наказание, если журналист будет взят под стражу за какое-то правонарушение, в основе которого идет дискриминация или подстрекательство этнической ненависти. Значит, а в социальных сетях, таких как Twitter или Facebook, значит, там следят за тем, чтобы такие проявления не были замечены, чтобы они были как бы прекращены. Так, дальше следующий вопрос. Is it possible to shoot on video everywhere in the USA, and what are the shooting restrictions?
Is it possible to shoot video everywhere? For the most part, it is. You can shoot video pretty much in any public. You can shoot video in any public place in the United States. The problem is when you're on private property and you don't have permission to shoot video there. For instance, shopping malls are considered to be private property in the United States, and shopping malls are very keen on preventing people from either shooting video or participating in political activity and the like, because they don't want to open themselves to be what's called a public forum in the United States. Because if you allow people to solicit for, causes, for instance, like the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, which is a perfectly wonderful cause, then, hate groups can come in and solicit as well. But for the most part, you can shoot video in any public area in the United States. Then I'm seeing the next question, are there any restrictions on filming children? Again, the answer to that is, for the most part, no. If you're showing children, in a group shot and the like, and again, if it's in a public area, there's no restriction. However, some people have very strong feelings about children being photographed without permission. And the news media is cognizant of that. They're sensitive to that, especially when you get people calling in and being upset. So a lot of times you'll see video of children, let's say at a school scene, but you might see the faces blurred out that isn't legally necessary, but because there are people who get upset about that, you know, the news media errs a lot of times on digitizing the faces. There are restrictions a lot of times about going onto school property and filming children. Again, you need to have permission to go onto a school property and film children. A lot of times in school districts in the US, and this happened when my two sons were in school, the school district will send a document to you at the beginning of the school year, essentially saying the news media comes onto our campuses from every once in a while to do stories. Do you have any objections to your son or daughter being interviewed or being filmed on campus and the like? Most people a lot of times won't respond to that, or they respond that they'll have no problem, but those people, and that will give the school district permission to do so. Some people respond that they don't want that. There's also a problem of filming children a lot of times if the children are involved in ugly custody disputes between the parents, and especially if it involves an abusive relationship. And you know, the abusive parent may not know exactly where his or her child is, and by filming the child at this particular school, a particular location, you provide that information. So that's something the media has to be sensitive to.
Окей, thank you. Значит, на вопрос, есть ли, возможно ли снимать видео везде в США и какие, значит, ограничения при видеосъемке? Значит, снимать можно везде. И, ну, в шоппинг-молах, вот в торговых центрах, обычно это является частной собственностью, и они запрещают съемку, чтобы потом не было никаких обсуждений в публичных форумах. Значит, если это частная собственность, то видеосъемка запрещена. Следующее. Есть ли ограничения на видеосъемку детей? Нет, но без родительского разрешения видеосъемка запрещена. Также, если вы пойдете, допустим, снимать в школу детей, то обязательно необходимо разрешение школы, специальное разрешение, чтобы снимать детей в школе. Следующий вопрос. What, in your opinion, is the role of media in modern society? Can media change our lives?
Oh boy. I mean, I think the media's role in our society is to hold up a mirror to our society. I mean, to hold up a mirror to who we are, both good and bad, to inform us about what our government is doing, what is happening in our communities, the effects of our governmental policies, both in our countries and around the world, and you know, to speak truth to power. I mean, you know, one of the things that's often said is the role of the media is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. But I think it's to speak truth to power, to challenge those who are in power in our societies and have them explain what they're doing and why. Basically, the question about can the media change our lives? Well, I think better information helps us make better decisions. And if the news media is doing its job in providing better information, more truthful information, information that is in context that we can understand, then we can all make better decisions with our lives, whether it be in our own private lives, concerning, say, the safety of drugs, or safety of various health regimens, safety of foods, or whether it's in our political lives about who we elect into office and who do we support.
Окей, thank you. Так, значит, как по вашему мнению, какова роль медиа в современном обществе и как медиа может поменять нашу жизнь? Значит, медиа является зеркалом нашего общества. Мы должны быть в курсе, что правительство делает. Медиа говорит правду. Медиа — это своего рода сила, которая дает вызов тем, у кого находится власть. И с помощью медиа они могут отчитаться за свои действия, для чего они это делают, почему они это делают. И медиа — это как рупор правды, значит. И может ли медиа изменить нашу жизнь? Да, конечно. Лучшая информация дает нам силу и право принимать более лучшие решения и дает безопасность нашей жизни. Так, дальше следующий вопрос. The question of digitalization, how will the US elections be held? How is the confidentiality of data guaranteed when voting online or by email?
Well, as you all probably know, the elections in the US are going on right now. People can vote by mail or vote in person in most states right now. I voted in Arizona a week ago. The end of the election is November 3rd, which is 2 weeks from today. People cannot vote online in the United States. You can vote, say, by mail. In Arizona, it's by getting on something called the permanent early voter list. And I get sent a mail-in ballot usually a month before election day, and I can either mail it in or go deposit it in a ballot box around, there's several of them around town, and I went into downtown Phoenix and deposited my ballot there. People can also go to polling places both before election day. There are a few what are called polling stations around town where they can vote early, or they can vote on election day. There are far more polling places on election day. You've probably heard a lot of President Trump questioning the safety and the validity of mail-in ballots. All facts point to the fact that voting by mail is perfectly safe and perfectly secure, that despite what President Trump has said over and over, there is little to no evidence of voting fraud regarding mail-in ballots. But I believe that President Trump is doing so to stir doubt in the election, in the results of the election. Right now, the polling in the United States shows that President Trump is behind former Vice President Biden in the race, but we'll see what the results are 2 weeks from today.
Okay, thank you. Значит, вопрос такой. Как будут проходить выборы в США? И что касается конфиденциальности, гарантирована ли она, если голосовать онлайн или по почте, по email? Значит, выборы в США будут проходить 3 ноября, и голосование будет проходить по имейлу. И американцы не могут голосовать онлайн, только по имейлу. Имейл высылается за месяц заранее, и люди могут положить свои заполненные бюллетени в ящик, называется такой бюллетеневый ящик, который специальный стоит. И люди также могут пойти в места голосования в день выборов или раньше. И считается, что это идеальный способ для голосования, безопасный, конфиденциальный, именно с помощью имейла. Но согласно вот этому голосованию, Трамп сейчас позади в выборе по количеству голосов, но мы посмотрим, что будет дальше. Okay, and next question. Так, is the media telling the truth? What about gatekeepers, agenda? doesn't the media shape public opinion?
Well, first of all, I mean, the media is not monolithic, right? I mean, it's, and all the reporters I know are very much interested for reasons of not only their own ethics, but their career to be providing information that they believe to be true. Or if they're providing information that they don't believe to be true, say it's being provided by one group and they're accurately reporting what these people are saying, they want to put that information into context so that viewers or readers can make up their own minds. As far as what about gatekeepers, I think we are the gatekeepers. I mean, the consumers are the gatekeepers. Just like when you go to, say, the market and you buy fruit or meat, I mean, you're looking at that piece of fruit or that piece of meat, decide, you know, is this something that you want to buy? Is this overripe? Is this spoiled? Or is this something that is more to your liking? And I think the same is true now, especially since the media is so fractured, and given how you know, anybody can publish anything on social media, it's up to the consumer, it's up to us to be knowledgeable about what we're reading and what we're seeing, and for us to put it into context, and for us to be, you know, skeptical, like all good reporters are skeptical about what they're told. I mean, the famous quote is, if your mother tells you that she loves you, go check that out or go confirm that. And I think that we should have that approach to anything that we read or see.
Okay, thank you. Ну, вопрос звучит так. Медиа говорит правду. Что касается гейткиперов, повестка дня, и медиа, она формирует мнение общественности. Формирует ли медиа мнение общественности? Ответ, значит, медиа, она не монолитная. И журналист, он подает информацию в контексте. И зависит это от нас, как мы сформируем наше мнение по поводу того или иного события. Поэтому мы сами гейткиперы, мы потребители. Хорошо, следующий вопрос, давайте. Все, вопросы уже закончились. The questions are over, I think. There are no questions. What media in the USA? What media in the USA do you consider the most reliable, objective, and why?
You know, I grew up in the New York area, and I've read the New York Times my whole life. I consider the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, to be the three best newspapers in the United States. I mean, as far as broadcast, I think the three US broadcasters, CBS, NBC, ABC, are all reliable. I'll watch CNN some. The BBC provides excellent coverage, especially of international issues. In fact, I'll record the BBC and American news every night because it provides more international news and provides more in-depth than the US media might provide. So, you know, those are the places I look for information. I'll read all sorts of other things as well.
Окей. Значит, какую медиа в США вы считаете более надежным, объективной и почему? Ну, спикер говорит, что он предпочитает New York Times, Washington Post среди печатных изданий, газет, а среди каналов CNN, BBC, так как BBC является американским новостным каналом, он затрагивает международные новости, которые более детальные, более глубокие. И также читает и другие газеты или смотрит другие каналы, но вот эти основные самые. So the next question is, how is the problem of Karabakh covered in the US? As I know, ministers of affairs both countries will be meet in Washington, D.C. on Friday.
Well, as I said, the reason I watch the BBC is to get more international coverage, and this is a good report. I think the question is that it doesn't really get covered all that much in many U.S. publications. And that's the sort of place where I would look for coverage from the BBC and other more internationally focused news organizations. Now, I'll look on the New York Times site after we're done to see if there's any coverage of this, but my guess is there may be coverage on Friday after the meeting, but I don't know if there's any coverage beforehand.
Thank you. Тут вопрос перевода. Что вы можете сказать насчет проблемы Карабаха в США? Как я знаю, министры обоих стран встретятся в Вашингтоне в пятницу. Ответ, значит, это событие еще пока не очень-то освещено. Я надеюсь, что в пятницу я посмотрю по каналу BBC или прочитаю в New York Times к этому времени, но пока это событие еще пока не освещено в СМИ. Все. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have time? Can I ask a question of all of you?
Okay.
I'm supposed to speak next week in a webinar concerning the effects of the COVID pandemic on journalists. And I was wondering if any of you could share in stories of how the pandemic has affected your coverage or affected how the government provides information to you.
Yeah, sure. We can share these links if you send to us, Daniel.
Sure.
Yeah, we would love to participate in such events too. Anyways, thank you very much for finding time to participating in our small lecture.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And see you. Yeah. Have a good one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Ну, уважаемые слушатели, я хотел сказать, что у нас сегодня выступили два замечательных гостя. Дэниел Барр из Соединенных Штатов. Он представляет у нас Cronkite School, школу Кронкита, массовых коммуникаций и журналистики, а также Себастьян Контин выступил у нас, представитель тоже по праву с Испании. Всех я прошу после данной лекции послушать, то есть пройти оценку нашего тренинга. Мы сейчас вам в чат бросим ссылку и попрошу вас пройти оценку сегодняшнего тренинга. Благодарю. Okay, Daniel, Professor Daniel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can be free. Thanks. Ребята, если у вас есть еще вопросы, мы обязательно данное видео выложим с переводом. И вы можете найти данное видео сегодняшнее на наших пабликах, страницах в YouTube, в Facebook, MediaTraining.kz и в Instagram страницах тоже. То есть мы постоянно регулярно выкладываем наших спикеров, и на любую интересующую тему вы можете найти наших спикеров. А касательно ссылки, которую профессор Дэниел пригласил нас послушать как журналистов, как COVID-19 отразился на наших странах, в частности, на журналистов, я обязательно с вами поделюсь этой ссылочкой, вы будете тоже найти на наших страницах. И послушать, и поучаствовать тоже в данном форуме. Благодарю.